Hi.
Hi.
Oh gosh. I'm having some technical challenges. Can you hear me now? If you could nod and give me a little yes. Hi, Fred. What a pleasure to see you. So this is funny, right? I have my computer has decided that it no longer operates off of my audio, and it's a great, fantastic mystery. And so what that means is that I am calling through audio through one machine and speaking to you and seeing you through my other. And the reason I'd like to do this is because I actually really love to see you. So if you are here and want to turn on your video, it brings so much pleasure to get to see your face because this is an interactive session, and stories are called out by the listeners. And so it's your presence, just, it makes it so much more fun. And so I would also just add to all this, I know my name's still Reina. So the lovely Reina Satori just led a class on my Zoom platform, doing shamanic cheerleading. It was really, that was so much fun. Fred, you were there. And it was a great expression of poetry and play and movement, embodiment, like, you know, and how do we bring all that to this time? So here's what we're going to do today, because you came for some sacred storytelling. So pardon that Reina's name is in front of my Zoom, but you know, this is what we're working with. We're going to drop in and do a little bit of a meditation of just coming really present. And then I'm going to actually turn on our recording. And we're going to go into a class today on sacred storytelling. This is a basic introduction to the landscape of storytelling as a sacred art form. And so we're going to have an opportunity to really explore kind of the bigger concepts of what is a story? What is it to use our voice in these times? You know, what defines something as sacred storytelling? And one of the things that I love is that, you know, there's no one that owns story, right? As humans, we are all inherently storytellers. And so there are going to be times that I ask questions, and they're real questions. I'm really and truly asking because I love to hear your voice, because your voice feeds our conversation, and it even feeds the direction of our conversation. So with that, I did want to ask if there's anyone here that wants to just say their name, their location, where you're zooming in from, and if there's something here that you came for, I'd really like to know that. So just to be clear, I'm not asking for commentary at this moment. What I'm asking for is if there's something really specific that you're wanting to understand more about or wanting to know, I like to know, because it'll shape the form of our class in terms of who's here. It's the benefit of showing up live, right? So you can take yourself off mute when you want to speak, or you can raise your hand and I will take you off mute. But again, your name, your location, if there's something specific that you're looking for. Yes, Maggie.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I live in Southern California, Thousand Oaks to be exact. And it's my second time on this class. I'm a yoga teacher of mindfulness. I'm also have knowledge of astrology, and I'm full of stories that I cannot find purchase to start. Where do I put my foot first so my other foot could follow? And so this is what I'm looking for, purchase.
Great. That's so clear. That's so clear. Okay, we will work with you today. Great. Anyone else want to say hello? Hi, Wendy. I'm just saying hello to my familiars. Recognize a couple of you guys. Hi, Fred.
Well, I can go. Fred Mindlin. I'm in Watsonville, California, and my work right now feels like transforming grief.
Okay. So are you working with, in a wonderment about how to work with story to transform grief? Do you want to speak a bit more about it?
Yes, and how to tell the story of our collective grief,
right,
in a way that is going to bring us forward.
Yeah. You know, this is a really interesting point. And I just want to call out in this moment, which is that, you know, I'm sorry, I have to move. Wait 1 second, because there's too much going on behind me. Okay. There's a difference between rage and grief, right? And right now we're at a time when there's so much happening and there's so much outrage. And what happens when we're in a conversation of outrage, and how does that hit people's systems versus what happens when we're daring enough to be alive in our grief about what's happening. And we could even go so far as just to take what's happening in Minneapolis right now. And what happens? So it's, I really appreciate this inquiry, because there's so much being lost right now. And we don't come from a culture that understands grief or understands how to express it or even how to receive it. And as storytellers, we have this really unique opportunity to model the safety. That's a weird word to choose when we use it. The safety of being in grief. You know, you can be alive in your grief and still alive in your joy. You can be alive in your grief and alive in your grace. And so it's a daring avenue to take on, because we don't have a lot of models for it. So I really appreciate you speaking to that. Anyone else want to speak to what they're here for? And again, I'll try to, yes, Natasha.
Hi, I'm Natasha, and I live in Oakland, California. So I've been praying a lot lately, and I am not a religious person, but I would say a spiritual person. But I have a group where we do the rosary and we explore the different mysteries.
Yeah.
Last night, each of us started telling like our personal story in reference to specific mysteries. And that just got me so excited about how to do that for myself. So I've been reading a lot, like I'm on your email list. And so this has been a long time coming. So it's just really perfect how to do that, that really speaks to my heart. So.
Thank you. I'm glad to have this time to finally get to be in person. It's such a funny thing, that little lovely, amazing newsletter, you know, it's like it goes out, it's a one-way conversation. It's very strange, you know, and so it's always a treat to get to receive the other side of it, you know, that we're in conversation. So, you know, in terms of really getting to, I think I might know a couple people in that group. So really getting to understand more of how to speak to your story, specifically in the mysteries. Is that what I just want to understand a little bit more what you're speaking to.
Yeah, I mean, well, the mysteries are sort of, although I went to Catholic school, they're sort of new to me because I don't think I was paying attention when I was, 8 years old. But when I read these and hear of them, particularly from the person who's leading this group, who I think you do know, I'm trying to understand how to connect that to my life now, and then how to tell that story. So It's not about the mystery in the sense of the Bible,
right?
But sort of on a bigger sort of spiritual level. Yeah. It's more practice Buddhism. So how do I put that all together in a way that isn't just words, but there's really when I pray, I want to have that same feeling when I'm telling the story.
Okay, beautiful. Okay. You know, one of the things I often think about is the archetype of the storyteller is the spider, you know, and what does the spider do? But it actually weaves between the dimensions. It weaves between time. And, you know, what are stories? You know, stories are not facts and information. You know, stories are something else. They're much richer. You know, they bring meaning, they bring context, and they connect the dots in ways, in an interdimensional way. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I literally have these crazy spiders that are making these like circular They're like globes. They're not normal webs. I was like, I don't know what you guys are doing, but you're super cosmic and interdimensional beings. And so that's what we're doing as storytellers also, is we can do this piece of weaving between the dimensions. And I think that's one of the ways that we can actually bring the mysteries here, is by this odd, amazing transmission of being able to connect things that people weren't able to connect on their own, or hadn't had the words yet, but could feel in themselves. And that's one of those magical things that storytellers do. Okay, I don't know what's going on with you guys. I'm completely off script and we haven't even begun yet. So let's begin. If there's something else that's burning inside of you, oh my God, Allison, hi, wow. I'm sorry, we are in the company of a fantastic storyteller. I mean, I'm sure many of you are fantastic storytellers, but this one I've gotten to hear her stories. And what a pleasure to see you.
I'm here for you. I'm here to see you.
What a treat, what a treat. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're going to place your feet on the thing that's closest to the earth, which is probably your floor. And I invite you to close your eyes. And as you do that, just bring all of your attention, all of your energy back into yourself. There's so much in the world that is calling for attention. And our energy goes out, 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 and gets dispersed so easily. So let us call all the energy back. You might even I like to sometimes see like these golden threads, these golden lines of my energy coming back. And sometimes I even like to see what I call the sacred screen, so my energy comes back, but it's cleared of all the muck and all the fear and all the stuff that's in the collective consciousness that it has to travel through, and it can just come back to me in my purest essence form. And sometimes as you call your energy back, you can actually feel it coming into yourself. You might even you're like, oh, there I am again. And sometimes you won't. We all feel in different ways. We all see in different ways. We all hear in different ways. And it's not about comparing yourself to how other people connect to their intuition. It's really about fine-tuning your own attunement to how do you connect with your intuition. Because you might have some unique way, some unique skill that can become an offering to others as you continue to attune to your deep knowing and way of how to listen. And allowing yourself to take in some nice deep breaths. I want to just breathe into the part of your body that most desires this breath. Could be your left knee, who knows? Most of us, it's going to be into the bottom of our bellies. I'm going to continue to invite you just to take in nice, deep, slow breaths. Einstein introduced us to the theory of relativity. And inside that theory is the concept that we actually control time. Control is not the right word. That we are part of the creators and creation of time. Meaning we can slow it down. And as storytellers, we are the creators of worlds, of realities, and we can slow down time in the way that we share. So let us delight in a few moments of timelessness today. And I invite you to continue just to wonder, what was it? What are you here for? What in it in the world of sacred storytelling is calling you forward today? And as you gain clarity on that, maybe it's what you thought, maybe it isn't. Just allowing that to live inside of you so that it might be spoken to today. And I'm going to bring you a quote. And this is one of my favorite quotes. We think we tell stories, but often stories tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen. And too often, stories saddle us and they ride us, and they whip us onward, and they tell us what to do. And we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That quote is by Rebecca Solnit, and it couldn't feel more relevant at this moment. No, I just couldn't. In terms of what is it to be living in a time when there are so many stories and the stories are all so different, you know, wow. And how do we manage that? How do we manage living in a world where there's so many different stories? I'm going to bring you one more quote, and this quote comes from, could you read that again? Asks Carmel Finnan. Yes, I will. It's also going to be on the email that I send out. I'm going to read it faster this time. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen, and often, too often, stories saddle us and they ride us and they whip us onward and they tell us what to do. And we do it without questioning. That's an interesting line. We do it. You know, I learned from Stephen Jenkinson, who's one of my elder teachers. Well, let's see if we can take the word we out of the conversation, because we actually can't speak for all the people. So, you know, maybe many people do it without questioning, but I would say in these times there's a lot of people questioning, you know. So anyway, pause and continue. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, these stories, or we can actually recognize them as stories, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. So what she's talking about here, and by the way, I always appreciate requests to hear a quote twice, because I often need to hear them at least 3 times. So, you know, what are we hearing here? But a hint about what it is to become a storyteller, and the process of cautious consideration to understand what is making up the stories inside of you. How clear and skilled are you at even being able to identify a story so that you can understand what's running and informing your operating system? I'm getting ahead of myself already, but this is kind of, we're heading in that direction. So here's another quote for you. The business of stories is not enchantment. And the business of stories is not escape. The business of stories is waking up. That's by Martin Shaw. I also love that quote because, again, it talks about the evolution of what I'm going to call a sacred storyteller. You know, and you know, I think that we've had the you know, this idea of, oh, isn't it lovely to be enchanted and be taken and swept away into another world, or, you know, to escape this world through story. You know, and what I'm hearing him say is, the business of stories, right? He's not talking about the storyteller. This is kind of interesting, right? He's actually bowing down to the story itself. And we'll talk a lot about that. You know, what is it to respect the life of the story? But that this entity, this stories, you know, that they could be actually here to support our, you know, he's saying waking up, you know, clarity, consciousness, awareness, you know, you could use a whole bunch of words. And so now you're beginning to catch the scent of what we're going to be getting into together. So I'll just say again, I'm going to introduce the landscape of storytelling. We're going to talk about what is a story. We're going to talk about sacred storytelling. And we're talk about some things that people don't take into consideration when working with story. So a little bit of an introduction to me is that even though it says Raina Satori right now, my name's Leah Lamb. And a little bit of my history is that a lot of my listening and understanding of story actually comes from working with the land. I grew up on a farm in Vermont, got way too much time to go wander in our back 40. And I also spent a lot of time working as a wilderness guide in Utah, Alaska, Minnesota, blessing Minnesota today. And for peace and ease in the transition, got to finish that prayer because our words matter, right? And so I was very lucky, and I had parents that spotted a talent and it gifted me very young, and they cultivated that. And they sent me to acting school, and I got to work with some of the extraordinary masters from a very, very young age, and was brought into a professional theater troupe when I was in high school. Went on to study acting in New York City under the tutelage of Sandy Meisner School at the Neighborhood Playhouse. Went on to work off Broadway and get to go to summer stock, and I got really into the professional world of theater at a very young age. And I started to understand the responsibility of storytelling, because at that time, my very first play was produced, and it was about my best friend in high school who had committed suicide. And I learned that what you put out comes back. So I didn't understand that when I was going to carry out this story of my own grief, my own loss, my own process, that it would also be an invitation to hear other people's. So I started to learn the responsibility of storytelling. I also discovered that there's this thing that happens in the room, in the world of theater, that there's a magic happens. It's as if there's a spell casting when you enter into this agreement of a shared story. That something happens when there's an agreement on collective listening, and that there's this world of co-created realities happen, where you can transform time and space and reality together. And I was really fascinated by how do you, this is a horrible word, but capitalize on that energy that happens there. And I really got inspired to understand, how do you work with theater as a form of social change? If people come out, you can invigorate them and inspire them and enhance their expression of life and experience of life. Then what happens? So I got really involved in social justice and working with theater as a tool for change. I ended up getting a master's degree in social work, so a lot of systems change concepts came in. And I ended up working with Al Gore, producing and hosting the Green Channel at his television network, Current TV. And there I learned this thing, and it was a really painful lesson to learn, that basically right there in the belly of all the climate change conversation, it turns out that facts and information are not the thing that will move people to change. And I really thought all you need to do is give people the information, inspiration, motivation, activation. And it turns out that the data showed us that people actually don't need any more information or even want any more information. That might be changing right now. But that we don't, and there's other data that says that humans actually can't even process data, that we are actually made of stories. We're not computers, we're humans, and we metabolize story, and that's what helps us make meaning. So if there is a bunch of numbers, we'll be fascinated, but we don't necessarily know how to make sense of it, make meaning of it. We need the narrative. So that led me into the world of storytelling. It led me down the path of sacred storytelling, mystical storytelling, and here we are today. So let's call a little bit on the ancient wisdom about the role of story and the role of language in particular. So the Hawaiians say that they believe that the words are so powerful that it can raise enough energy to slow the world or set it into motion. I think they said that before Einstein's theory of relativity. The Sicilians believe that words poke holes in the universe. Think about the last time you got into a big fight and can't take back what you said. The Australians say that the stories of the past must be sung to the present so the future can exist. The Maoris say that words don't describe a thing, that the words are the thing. And all of the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I'm going to say that again because it's such an ancient wisdom that has been messed with. That the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. It gives us a hint of humans' unique role on this planet. Although we can't fully understand the language of the birds, you're probably hearing birds, like I can't speak bird, so maybe they're singing the world into existence and I can't even understand it. But we do know that we understand humans' unique role, being able to think of something, speak it, and create it, shape matter. And abracadabra, it's one of the oldest words on the planet. It comes from the Arabic mysticism. And it says, I create what I speak. So now let's get into this realm of what is a story? I'm going to ask you to really consider that. It's a real life question that I'm asking you. What is a story? There's no right or wrong question. There's no right or wrong way to answer this. And what I would mention is that we can play at the game of eloquence, and how do you play eloquence? Eloquence is, the game of eloquence is when you don't have to have the right answer. You kind of take a deep breath, you ground to the earth, you open to spirit, and you trust that something could flow through you. So you don't go on and on and on. You trust that there could be some succinctness also. So what I invite you into this way, so maybe you don't know exactly what to say when I ask this question of what is a story, but you kind of feel inspired to give it a whirl.
What's the game called?
What is a story?
Elephants?
I don't know. This is actually just a literal question. I'm saying, what is a story? How do we understand? What is a story? How do we live with stories?
It's the meaning we bring to our experiences upon reflection, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. So right, so stories, it's like they give us context, they give us meaning, and they also help us define our role in the world. So I would say Allison and I'll get a little bit personal. We've both gone on health journeys, and I think if there's anything that forces you to get really clear about the role that you're going to play as a health journey, at least that's what it did for me. And in my particular health journey, which we might talk about later, I had this moment. It's probably when I actually learned about what sacred storytelling was, when I had a moment where I could make a choice about what role I was going to play in this story. And I had an advantage, right? Because I grew up in the world of storytelling. So I grew up in the context of roles. And so I had that architecture already in my mind, And for me, in that moment, I was like, I'm not going to play the victim in this one. I'm not playing that role. And when I chose, when we bring meaning to our stories and we consciously choose the roles that we're going to play, it starts to define our script. It starts to influence how we speak, and it influences how we tell the story. And as we tell, and then it influences how people hear our story, and then how they respond to us based on how we tell our story. And then if we tell them a certain role, I've played the opposite too. I've also played the victim many, many years in my life, and people treat me like one. It's amazing. So I thank you for mentioning that, in terms of it gives us so much capacity for context and meaning. Carmel is saying, I hope I'm pronouncing your name, it's a pattern we use to express our experiences. A pattern we use. I'd love for you to say a little bit more about that. Fred's saying, whatever people will keep listening to and feel good about having heard. I love that. Right, stories do have something where it's not like, when I tell you a story, it's not like I went to the post office and I dropped off my letter and then I came back. I gave you some information, I have someone really lovely in my life who does that. A story there's a meaning in it. There's some purpose. There's something I want to give you. This is why I'm going to tell you. There was this really amazing guy in the post office today. He looked me in the eye and he said, I see you. I see that you're smiling, even though my mask was on. And so I had this way of connecting in the world in a way that I didn't think was possible. That's like, I'm just taking a little, I actually had that experience at the Home Depot, but so it's like, why am I telling you this story? It's not that I went to go get some paint. It's that something happened there that affected my life that I want to give to you. So it takes some responsibility. Carmel's going, the pattern is before and after the pivotal event, right? Okay, so you're speaking about story structure, and right, there's got to be a beginning, middle, and end, and different societies work with that in different ways. So in the Western culture in particular, we are almost, I'm going to use this language, it's a bit harsh, under a state of abuse from the hero's journey. It is so entrenched and entrained into so many of our story structures that it's like we think that's what a story is. What is dangerous about that particular structure? It's a very masculine approach to life. You have to have a demon or a monster to be able to discover your true capacity and what you have to offer, right? You have to leave and come back. That is one story structure that does happen and exist. also in our Western culture of, you know, the beginning, middle, and end in particular in the West, we really like our endings to be all caught up in and complete and taught, you know, in a bow, and even like happy endings. We're kind of addicted to the happy ending. If you listen to, and we're patterned in that way, this is where I'm going off of what Carmel's saying, we're actually patterned to understand the story in that way. So we have a craving to have receive that kind of patterns in our story so that we feel complete when we're done. If you start to listen to different kinds of indigenous myths, there's far more comfort in living with the mystery, with living with the unexplainable and the unknowable, you know, and they're very disconcerting stories. I just read one the other day from the Pueblo Nation out of New Mexico. And the story goes something like this. There's a little girl. She wakes up one morning and she says, "Mom, I want my favorite breakfast." And her mother says, "Well, we're out of wood. You're gonna have to go and get some wood." So the little girl goes off into the woods and she brings back some sticks and she drops them at her mother's feet, and the sticks turn into snakes. And the mother's angry. She's like, "Take those snakes out of here and go get some wood." Well, the girl is very upset, completely distraught, and decides she's gonna go kill herself. And so she heads out of the village and she heads towards the lake. And this old man is walking through and he sees some things outright. He's like, "Little girl, shouldn't you be going home?" And she's like, "I'm gonna go kill myself. My mother wouldn't make me the breakfast that I wanted." And he can't catch her, she's too fast. So he goes back up the way to the mother's home and he yells up to her, he goes, Mother, your daughter is not in a good way. She's gonna go kill herself." So the mother collects all of her clothes and she runs off to the lake where her daughter is heading. And she's yelling after her daughter, but she's too late. And by the time she gets there, her daughter's dead. And all of those clothes end up fluttering off into becoming butterflies. It's a very disturbing story. It's so disturbing. For me, I should just say, maybe it's not disturbing for you, you know. But what does it do? But it gives us a way to live with the unexplainable. It gives us a way to live with those things that feel like a cruel set of fate in life. It gives us a way to say, yes, there's space in life, in the world, for us to live with that too. And when we are being, you know, suffocated by stories that try to make meaning out of everything, and this is really something for me to say because I love making meaning out of everything. But when that's the only story structure that we live in, it actually disallows us, I don't know if that's a word, to actually be alive in the mystery of life. And how do we get to live with what that Fred was speaking, with the grief, with the cruelty of life? How do we actually make space to allow that to be part of life when our stories don't give us a way to give it context and meaning? So another way of talking about a story, I went totally off. You guys are just great. I'm beyond off script. So if we talk about a story and we understand it does all these different things and it has all these big jobs, now let's think about one other thing, which is, and this is a very unromantic expression of what a story is, but it's another context. So if we understand that humans explain themselves in reference to the latest technology, we used to call ourselves machines, now we're talking the language of computers. I'm going to go so far as to call a story an operating system. And in this operating system, we learn our beliefs, our values, and what we believe is possible. A lot more that happens in there, but those three things are definitely like the cornerstones. So start considering all the stories. Like I just heard this the other day, after years of teaching this very concept, you know, all of our TV shows are called programming, right? So yeah, don't you love how the language is actually like built right into us? So, you know, those of us who grew up in Walt Disney's heyday, you know, I was really programmed to think that romance and was really supposed to look a certain way, that relationships were supposed to be a certain way. And I would say I was programmed for that, you know, to have that kind of expectation based on the kind of stories and media that the world showed me was how, you know, the exaltation expression of it. So there's this deconstruction when you start to go back to that idea that first we've got to be able to see what a story is so that we can choose, hey, I'm either going to choose to live in that story or I'm going to be chosen to be living in that story, you know, and choose your role or be chosen to live in someone else's story. So that's one way of looking at a story. Now, if we look at that and we go, okay, what's a sacred story? this is another question that I'm throwing out to you guys. What makes a story sacred? There's no wrong answer. Appreciate the deep thoughts. I'm seeing some typing happening. Sacred means set apart from the mundane. It's the ordinary stuff of the world, right? A sacred story, says Helena, is a deep truth that changes you to hear it. Okay, so now you're talking about, oh, so this is something that has a universal truth in it that actually affects me in my system. Fred's saying sacred, oh, it's not the mundane, right? So now we're beginning to hint at sacred, oh, it has to do with the unseen world, what lives there. Carmel's saying it's the belief that we have about it. All stories are sacred. So one of the ways that I understand about sacred stories is that they are a story that has a life form, a life force inside of it, right? That affects us, and what distinguishes a sacred story to me is that it is here to serve life. So it's a life that's here to serve life. So that means that, that piece that Helena speaks to, that has a deep truth that changes me. So Fred, you can tell me your story of grief. And when it's told as a sacred story, and this is kind of, getting a little bit ahead of myself, but when it's told as a sacred story, it's also a gift. I'm giving you something. There's different stages of storytelling. Sometimes I've gone through deep trauma and I need to say, please witness me in this. I just need you to see this. And then there's also a process when you can go through your trauma and you're like, oh, I'm going to dig through, I'm going to understand the gems and the wisdom and how I've been changed and the medicine of this experience. I'm going to give that story to you. That's a gift for you. This is going to have those universal truths. It stops being about me. It starts being about you. So there's also another definition of a sacred story. To me, it's in that form of giving. There's a sense of generosity in it. It's a story that can be carried because it has some medicine, it has some potency, it has some life in it. And so if you think, okay, well, that's a sacred story. And I would also say, it's like, think about the last time that you were around the dinner table with a group of people. This is a weird thing because this didn't used to be so hard to imagine. And someone started talking story. And as they were talking story, either the group got excited and invigorated, or maybe they were just complaining about politics and they're talking story and all of a sudden energy can kind of go down, And I think of stories, it's like bringing someone to the table. Who did you bring? Did you bring some wisdom to the table, or did you bring the complainer to the table? And it's all coming through your story. So, okay, that sounds nice. This is an expression of a sacred storyteller. Also, sacred stories. So then, what's an unsacred story? I don't, and I'll just say that anytime we call something sacred, it's complete setup. Because what we're saying is that we see the divine, we see the life in something that's sacred. And I feel like we need this language because we don't live in a time, particularly, when we've remembered those indigenous ways of seeing the life in all things. And so we call on this word to remind us and to give us a context to remember that way of being, of seeing the life in all things. All things are sacred. A garbage dump could be sacred if we could treat it as such. So now if we go into this context and we're like, okay, well then what's the other side of a sacred story? I would say it's a zombie story. And a zombie story is not here in service of life. So now we can start thinking about the TV shows that are on your watch list, and start thinking about how do you feel. Some of these shows that are coming out right now are just extraordinary, life force giving. Feel better about being a human. I went on a great journey of emotion. I laughed, I cried. It was better than cats, right? Some of them, I just feel like humans should be kicked off the earth after watching them. I feel depressed. I feel like I feel dull to violence, and so that to me is a zombie story that is not here to serve life. That's here to serve something else. And I don't think that all stories or all zombie stories are created intentionally. So an example of that is Jaws. And the story of Jaws is that it was created by Peter Benchley. It was produced by Steven Spielberg. It was the very first film that he ever made. what do we want to do when we go back to a story is understand who created it, what was their intention, what were they driven by, what were they informed by. You know, I don't know Steven Spielberg's whole story, but I do know that he wanted to become a famous director. He had a good sense of what would make people look. You know, I know that they were changing the script every single day, and it was the first film that was ever shot in the ocean, and everything went wrong, including the giant metal shark broke. And so they did what good filmmakers do, and they started putting together bits and pieces of that metal shark to represent the shark in the film. And so what happens is that it jumped the shark. I couldn't resist myself, I'm sorry. And it became a symbol for our fear of the unknown and our fear of death. And then if you are, you know, kind of in the land of symbolism and Jungian studies, and understand that we are floating around in this collective unconsciousness, right? Or collective consciousness, excuse me, that the ocean represents consciousness. So now this image of this, you know, this film is shot in the ocean. We've never been exposed to that, you know, so it's like, here we are seeing a film that's taking place in our consciousness. Shark comes up as being representation of our fear of the unknown, our fear of death, biggest, oldest fear that humans have ever known in the oldest of stories. And then all of a sudden there's this mass kill off of sharks all across the globe, really seeded from the fear of that film. And when Peter Benchley, the creator of that story, started to see what had happened, what his story, the consequence of his story on this planet, that we're killing off this keystone species that we're all actually connected to, he spent the rest of his life trying to do ocean conservation and ocean protection work. So I see this as a cautionary tale, because I don't think that, you know, people are out there trying to create zombie harmful stories. But I do think that this is a call for conscious creators, that more than ever, as we begin to understand the influence of our stories on others and the power of our stories, then there becomes a responsibility. Hey, I don't know who that was, but there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going with our little class. So let's see here. I feel like, why don't we go into a story structure? Because we had some really great expression about, we had some good inquiry. And so what I'm gonna invite you to do is to write a short story. Would that be a nice way to end out our time together? And what I'll say is that I'm going to give you this story structure, and we'll finish off. I'll read a quote, and then our class will come to completion. We'll get a couple of shares if we want. And then if people want to stay on afterwards and learn about more ways to work with story, I have 3 amazing classes coming up, and I'll just speak about them briefly after this. And if you just came to the class, then be free. We'll be done soon. Okay, so here's the deal. And I want to speak to that. We had some people speak to, oh, how do I, you know, Fred was saying, how do I speak with grief? You know, and Natasha was speaking to, how do I weave between the worlds? You know, how do I bring personal meaning to this greater story of I can't contextualize what you said, but I understand it. And so now what do we do? But we say, okay, you know, specifically, if you're going to work with grief, you know, I'm gonna give you a wisdom story, but let's play. If you're one of those people that wants to also speak to grief, you know, so like, for example, you know, when my best friend in high school committed suicide, that was a story that spoke of grief. Okay, so you might want to let's play with this concept right now, because being able to hold stories that have grief, you know, it's like there's a couple of ingredients that we need to have with them. So think about this moment. I've never done this before, so I'm winging this with you in terms of a story recipe. So just so you know, I use story recipes. And what a story recipe is it's, I don't know about how you cook. You know, I cook, recipes are merely inspiration. It is not a literal expression of exactly that happens, right? You throw something in, and you throw something else in, and then you make sure that it tastes really good. But it gives you a structure and a form to go for. So this is how I think of stories, recipes too. I'm going to give you a structure and form to go for it. And then you allow the muse to inspire you. So if you get inspired to add something else, by all means add it. So let's think about this. There was a form of grief in your life, some kind of loss, some kind of hardship. And allow yourself to come alive in that. You know, there's a beauty in that. And we don't have a lot of ways and places that allow us to express grief and loss. So I just want you to know also that in telling your story and being alive in the grief, there's a gift that happens. And this is the transmission that happens between storytellers and the listeners. Storytellers will oftentimes do a heavy lifting. We will feel the anger, or we will feel the grief and the sadness. And by our willingness to be courageous enough to feel it, this is the key thing. We don't leave people in it, right? So when we go through the story of loss and grief, we don't leave people in the depths of grief. Otherwise, they won't trust us to take them out. They won't be able to touch it themselves. But when they can inherently feel, the storytellers we're going to take them on a journey, but we're not going to leave them in the depths. We're going to take them out to where they can keep walking in the world. Then they can access the grief in themselves through you. Okay, so it's one of the great gifts. But again, you have to be trustworthy, and people somehow are animals at the beginning, middle of the day. And so if someone smells that you're just going to take them into the depths and leave them there, they're not going to go. They're going to sit back and they're just going to watch you. Put on a great show. You know, so that's just an advanced thing on performance that we can't get too deeply into in this class, but a little piece to hold in your consideration. So we have this moment of grief in your life that has some kind of loss, tragedy, hardship. It's so cheering. And your invitation is to write about it. Now, the place where I always like to go is, where does your story really begin? Where does the story really begin? Because again, we are context weavers. We're creators. We're not talking about going to the post office and dropping off the mail, right? It's like time is interdimensional. And so my friend about Sheila, you know, the loss that I had for her, the grief, the depression, you know, the friendship, the desire for friendship, that kind of being met and seen, and someone who I also understood the depression and sadness in me, that which created our kinship and our connection. Well, that came alive way before we ever met. So my story begins before meeting Sheila. So think about, you know, again, where does your story really begin? Now, when you ask these questions, it's like you almost push them outside your mind, because your ego is just going to try to get linear. It's going to try to get literal. And what is a sacred story, right? That has that divine life force in it. So this is where you kind of get to call the divine for your inspiration, for your muse. And so I like to take these questions for a little walk, or again, take all the energy. It's not my ego. I'm not going to like figure it out by squishing my eyebrows together. Although you see the lines, I've tried that plenty of times. I can tell you it doesn't work. You know, so it's like you have to, you know, kind of allow the question to come live up here in your psychic space, so you can be informed and inspired. And you don't have to know the answer. You just have to be able to be willing to live with a question. And then the inspiration can come through, and you can be like, oh, I had no idea that the reason why we were such good friends was because I was really depressed. You know, oh, okay. I discovered something in my telling that's going to be a gift to someone else eventually, you know, about what is it to be aware and alive of depression on the other side of it, not while still in it. Okay. So then you go to there's the thing. You're going to have to talk about the thing. And this is the thing where like there's a real power in reflecting and then writing something. And they say, especially if it's a traumatic event, not to write for more than 20 minutes. Okay. And they discovered this with men that were coming back from war, probably men and women, but you know, specifically veterans of war. And they discovered that 20 minutes of reflection, and they could be in a state of discovery. But when you go too long, you can actually go into a state of going down the rabbit hole of reliving those experiences and reactivating the trauma. And that's not what we're here to do. You know, we're making medicine of our stories. Okay? And that's the real That's the real purpose and intention of, because we're in the realm of sacred storytelling. So you're going to do that. And so you might not write it all at once, and you might allow yourself to have a great sob and find some great music. I really think this matters, you know, that to find some music that has the resonance of your feelings so you can even access it more and more, and allow yourself not to know the story. Allow yourself to discover new things about your experience in the story as you write it. And this is really important, because if you keep telling a story over and over again, it's like stories are like trees. They want to grow, they want to evolve, they want you to be able to change your own shape and form in them because of how you lived in them. And that's going to be part of how you create the story, is how have you changed through the expression of living through this story. So that would be your kind of your other flagpost indicator of wonderment. How are you changed? I think one of the most extraordinary, important pieces of storytelling is understanding the absolute wholehearted necessity and requirement of beauty, especially when asking people to go look at hard things. So where is the beauty in your story? And allow yourself to wonder and be informed. You know, in my story of loss and grief, it's coming alive in me. So I'll tell it. One of my favorite memories of Sheila was we would have these long breaks, and there were these holly bushes that grew outside our school. And one day we were out sitting by the holly bushes, and we were just talking like girls do a lot. We were probably talking about boys. And we sort of just spontaneously started picking these red holly berries off of the bushes. And I had one of these old army jackets that I got from this thrift shop. And we started just like filling these like really big wide pockets with all these red holly berries. And it was kind of amazing. After about an hour or so of talking, we had like hundreds of holly berries in my pockets, and we didn't know what to do. And as teenagers do, when you don't know what to do, you just start wandering. And we went back into the school, and our school was really like the most depressing, public, neglected building of Richmond, Virginia. It was like the paint was coming off the walls. They couldn't even use the cafeteria because there were so many bugs in there. This is a true story. And it was just gray and drab. And I don't know how we came up with the idea, because sometimes great things, you don't know how or why they happened. But we started taking those red berries and we threw them down the halls like bowling balls. And the next thing we knew, there were these like red berries filling all the hallways with this life, with this color, with this passion. And people couldn't see them. I remember this one teacher in her high heels surrounded by little red berries, and nobody could see them but us. And that was some of the magic that Sheila and I had, is we were able to see things in the world that not everyone else could see. So that's a little piece of a story, you know, and so, you know, there was beauty in the connection. There was joy, there was play. And we have to bring these parts out because it's part of a whole story, right? There was also grief and loss, you know, but when we have the beauty, it's like when we're nourished by that, we are fed, and we have the strength and the courage to then be present and to feel the loss when it arrives. And then, you know, it's like as big as your grief can feel as much as your joy. So then we give people more access when we're willing to be that courageous with our own expression. So I'm going to give you, let's say like 5 minutes to write out a story. You know, Allison, I wrote one of my most favorite stories for an event that you inspired at the National Storytelling event. Allison has hosted many moth events, and she's taught about how to prepare stories for the moth. And I did this, I literally created this story in 5 minutes, and I just bullet pointed it out. And it turned out to be a really fun story. I think it's why we became to be friends. So, you know, you can do it. You can really do it. It's the trick, here's the trick, don't think. Just don't think for a couple of minutes. Just kind of guide your way through, bullet point a couple of things and see what happens. So I gave you the context for a grief story, but you can do that with wisdom for anything. So I invite you to go play for 5 minutes and we'll come back. Okay, so you've got 1 minute left. And as you're ready, come on back. I know you won't be completely done. You'll have something. Okay, so here we go. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 short stories, and then I'm gonna bring us to a close. Does anyone feel compelled to share? If you do share, I'm gonna ask that you keep your story very brief, just like 2 to 3 minutes, only because we know it's just a new baby story that you're in the state of discovering. Does anyone feel compelled to share? No one has to share. You can also just share about your experience. What did you discover? You're a quiet group. Yes, Fred.
There's a boundless kind of joy that I feel on realizing that I have an art, that I can tell stories that move people, that change people's experience. And the only thing that compares to that is the joy that I see on the faces of children in that moment where they first master a challenging string figure. And what I'm grieving right now is the loss of that, being able to be in the same space with those students and feeling that joy. And in some ways, this moment here with you all helps me to see that, yes, it's possible to feel that even over these weird wires and with these bizarre kind of pixel dances that we now all have to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you speaking to that and the truth of that. And, you know, it's storytelling, it's a two-way conversation. It really is. And stories are created out of the people who listen to them. I didn't get into the science of that. Usually they talk about the neuroscience of that. But, you know, I think Fred just spoke so clearly about what happens when you get to receive back the joy of the gift that you gave. And yeah, we're in a really weird world now. And how do we live in it? And how do we keep finding our connections? And thank you for speaking something that's very alive in me as well. I think we have space for one more comment if someone wants to speak or share. Jane?
Hello. Oh, yeah, good to see you. Jane in Scotland here.
Oh, Jane! Oh my God, it's you, Jane! Hi! Jane and I met in Kauai a long time ago. Hi.
Well, 9 years or so.
I had to make the screen really big to recognize you. Sorry.
In your class, I've been joined for a while, so what I just experienced there was just, well, I couldn't access the grief when you suggested like the grief, and it's like a part didn't want to go into that, so then I pivoted to choose the wisdom story instead. And I get this mind blank thing that happens, and I get it in different situations where it's like everything just sort of shuts down, and I can't it's like I go to the same story because it's what I can remember right now, and I kind of forget about all the other things that that I've experienced. So I did write something, but it was based on a story that I've already written, and it didn't. So it doesn't have that aliveness in it, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess I just wanted to sort of bring that question or that comment.
So a couple of things is, and I really just appreciate you bringing to this of like, you know, some people might call that writer's block, you know, and what you're speaking to is there's this aliveness where you're also saying, okay, it's the same story I've always told, or what's new, what, you know, or what brings something, you know, I hear you wanting the aliveness of the story. And so I would then actually go speak to the story itself. In this moment, I also really believe in taking walks. Like my best story comes from, you know, writing, you know, or like cleaning the house, you know, go sweep or do something. The next thing I know, I get really inspired to like, oh, now I understand what's supposed to happen in the story. So cleaning the dishes or taking a bath or going for a walk or taking a shower. But also sometimes just writing it to the story, going to the story and say, what are you in service of? You know, if this is a story that has a life purpose, you know, and has a gift to give. So kind of get out of our knowing of the story and as if coming to it in this kind of humble way and as if saying, what is it to get to know you? What is it to get to know this great stranger who I haven't met, you know, or, you know, it's sort of like, you know, how can you make room for someone that you've been in a relationship with a really long time and you think you know everything about them, but how can you make space for them to change, you know, and be alive to who they are today, not 10 years ago. Right. So same thing with your story and say, okay, what are you in service of? What are you here to do? What do you need to say? And then again, it goes that kind of like, you know, takes all the thinking out here and, you know, you might be inspired and think of something that you've never thought of before.
I love that, yeah, asking the story. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good to see you. So anything else burning that wants to be said, spoken, or asked before I start rounding the bend of closing our time today? Yes, Fred. Oops. Wait.
There.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to share one. When you mentioned early in your discussion about the Australian Aboriginal storytelling and their sacred stories, and I was reminded of one of John Young's stories about how actually in our frameworks, many Australian Aboriginal stories are literally profane in the sense of they use scatological imagery, they use sexual imagery, they use all these things that we put on the other side of the sacred because they're memorable. And that's, as you were talking about, how the stories have to be told to keep alive the path finding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the great ways to anchor is with things that are surprising in that context because they come from that other world that you don't think of.
Thank you. Right, and they've got to be memorable. Our stories have to be memorable or they won't last, you know. Okay, so here's what I'm going to say. This would be the closing part of today's class. You know, if you came just for the class and you get to play and think about sacred storytelling, then we can bid you adieu. If you're curious about more ways to keep working, I'm going to take about 6 minutes just to show you and introduce you to a couple of ways that we can continue to play. So I put these links in the chat box, but I'll also put them here. And I'm actually going to do a quick thing where I'm going to share my screen and just take you through a quick tour because some of the things you can't see yet because they're not live. This is so exciting. Okay, so this is a program that is live right now. And there's a link in there. And This is called Love Medicine, Heal Your Love Stories. This is for people who specifically, you want to work with your relationship to love. And I feel like it was really very much inspired by working with the energies of the day that we're in Venus retrograde. I've actually never run a storytelling class in alignment with astrological timing, but it just seemed like a really playful way to be in what's a pretty hard time. And, you know, it's if anything, love is up, right? You know, in terms of if it's between our relationships, between our intimacy, and also like what's going on in the world, you know, in terms of social justice. It's an expression of love, or a guardian against it. So in terms of Venus retrograde, why it's kind of a special time is because this planet comes really close to this Earth. It's closer than any other planet. And it's almost like a revelatory time where we can see the patterns in our behaviors in terms of how we do our interrelational, intimate relating in a clear and easier way. So it's kind of an amazing time to go into this deep dive of working with your stories. And what I'll do through this process is I'll take you through a process of exploring. We tell the literal story, and we'll tell, you know, if it's a hard unresolved story, we might tell it for the last time. I have a process where I'll bring people through a mythic expression. We'll do a little bit of fun activities of talking like, what is the story of love itself? You know, so that we can really get to know love as a character and a being outside of a Hollywood romantic Walt Disney expression of it. And then we'll finalize our expression with a storytelling ceremony in class. These are really fun classes, I gotta say. And one of the things that I'm doing with them, sorry, I'm just cruising through all this so you can see it, is that we are working with this ritual kit. And so it's really understanding that, you know, especially when we're going in to change a story, that transition and transformation happens. What is transformation? Changing of form. So it's like we actually are changed when our stories are changed. And I understand that bringing the kind of these ancient traditional ritual practices of collaborating with the earth, you know, that how do we hand over the things that we don't know how to hand over, you know, or how do we invite things in that we don't know how to invite in, and how do we create this collaborative relationship with the unseen world? So we actually built this into this class also. And these are handmade design kits just for us by the lovely Brittany Nelson. And she puts a lot of thought and consideration into like collecting all these herbs just for us one by one. Those are prayer leaves so that you can write different intentions each day with them. It's just beautiful. And you can also collect those things on your own if you don't want to do that. There's special COVID pricing, so there's a full range. You know, the price of the course is $197 for a 4-week course, but there's also, if you need a COVID scholarship, there's scholarships available for $55 and $100. So it's up to you on that. And if you want to learn more about it, tomorrow at the same time, I'm doing another masterclass with my guest teacher, who's going to be Sasha Benedetti, and she's this astrologer who specializes in Venus cycles. So it's kind of, you know, we get to geek out and have all kinds of fun. So that's that. And that starts next Tuesday, I think. This Saturday, I'm doing a class, and this is part of a year-long story initiation program that I'm doing. And this is working with just one story. And again, we're looking at working with story as an entrance into the mysteries, where we can learn more through the expression of story than I can personally, by going off and doing a bunch of therapy. So it's a different way of working with the things we're wanting to work through. And this one we're doing, I'm sorry, I'm going too fast, is a story of power. So if you're someone who is like, I just did the story of power and you're just like kind of went zing, this might be for you, you know? And it's, how do you relate to power? How do you source your power? How do you give away your power? You know, and so we go through this. It's a long day. It's a full day of working together in ceremony, in ritual. We do not sit and stare at a video screen the entire time. We actually have a lot of time on our solo time, working in small groups, even some time outside, to really work through the story. I'm going to say that my computer could pop off at any second because I'm not plugged in. So I'm going to go really fast. No, sorry. And if I leave, that's what happens. And then the last class I'm going to teach you, you're the first group that's ever seen this. This is super exciting. This page is not even live yet. This is a brand new program called Sanctuary. Oops, that's it. Oh, wait, hold on. I can look at that. I can out trick my own system. Okay. I can't show you any more of the video, unfortunately. Hold on, sorry. Speak. There we go. My computer died, so I can't walk you through the program, I guess. But anyway, there is a program called Sanctuary that will probably go live for registration starting next week. It begins in July. And this program was wholeheartedly born out of these times. And I teach a program called Speak the Spark, which has been an introductory course, collaborating with a lot of master teachers to really bring back this old ancient art of sacred storytelling. And we've done a lot of study of the theory of it. We've done a lot of theory of the philosophy of it. We've done a lot of, beginning to touch and practice on different things. And as I really listened to what wants to be born out of this time, it was really about how do we deepen? How do we really, really deepen into and harvest from the depths of ourselves, of this time, the gifts through the act of sacred storytelling, which, in its very essence is about connection, about community building, about village making, about caring for the wisdom and the teaching so that, those who come behind us can stand on our shoulders of what we've learned and discovered and continue on. Why do we have to all start at the same place? So this program, Sanctuary, is an introductory course, this new program, and it is born out of a process of developing psychic silence. So, I spoke about this process of like, hey, pop out of your ego brain and like live in this space, and that's where your inspiration can come from. And to me, this is like, let's say this is where our psychic space is informed. And as creators, and as a call for conscious creators, are we calling and creating more fear? Are we calling and creating more love, more freedom, more accessibility, more compassion? Where are we creating from? And what I understood is, in terms of like step one of becoming conscious creator, is really having mastery, I'm gonna use that word, over understanding what's living in your psychic area, your psychic space. So I created this course. It's a 6-week course that is unlike anything you've ever had before. It's like my dream course all in one. So it's actually like, I forgot her name, Marie, somebody, so it's part actually claiming a room in your home, and I actually recommend your bedroom, and transforming it into a sacred space. So part of it is you literally clear everything out. And while you clear everything out, I've created a 70-page guidebook called the Psychic Silence Guidebook, which leads you through all these different processes and steps of really being able to unfold and see what are the roles that you are unconsciously claiming that live in that space. What stories do you unconsciously tell yourself? And so understanding all of this is in your dreaming space. So you really want the space that you dream to be clear and clean and held as sacred, because that's what is holding you as sacred. And so with this class, we get to go through this physical practice, and it's kind of under that principle of as within, so without, as above, so below. And that as we do this recreation of our space, you're going to see in physical form who you are and what drives you as a creator. So we're going to get to reveal your creator matrix. And that's such a hot word right now. It's so confusing, but it's a word that came through a dream, and so I'm going to trust it, and that it's what is your particular coding for how you create. And once you start to understand it, you'll also get to see your strengths as a creator, and you'll also get to see where your challenges are. So the intention is to really clear your channel so that you can be creating and thriving, and so some of us create stories. Some people create buildings. Some people create towns. It's like we're all creators. So this is the introductory course that will prepare people for, the rest of the program for the year, which gets into storytelling. So that's coming down the pike. If that excites you, that excites me personally. And then what is happening after that? It's a 6-week class. We take a 3-week break, and then we go into our 4-week class where we meet once a week, and we go into Mythos. And Mythos is a a 4-week class where you cultivate what you found in terms of what your creator matrix is, what your creator archetype is, and you get to create your very own mythos, your own personal creation story. So that's what I got going on. I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions if you have any questions. And otherwise, I'm going to bid you adieu. Yes, Wendy, it's take yourself off mute because I don't think I can right now.
I was just saying, it's all great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. I can't see you all because now I'm on my phone. Is there anyone else that has questions? You can always just take yourself off mute and ask.
Leah, what are the times
Thank you
for the
so much.
sanctuary story?
Thank you, Fred. And Allison,
Bye-bye.
what were you saying?
What
Bye-bye.
What's the times
Yeah.
for the sanctuary story?
Yeah, so I do 10 a.m. from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I do that because we have a lot of more and more people from European time zones are wanting to participate. I believe that the love story class begins on a Thursday, so I think that they're Thursdays. It's the love story. The story of power is this Saturday, and it begins at 10 a.m. and it goes to 8 p.m. That's a full day. So I say if you want to come to that class, really you want to be present for the whole day. And someone's asking, it's a very long name. Is Mythos a standalone class? Yes, you can come just to Mythos. You don't have to do everything leading up to it.
But the sanctuary one you talked about that was in July?
Sanctuary begins in July. So Mythos will happen in August.
And so is that Thursdays as well?
I'm
guess
putting it all together right now. This is your moment to put in a request.
Thursdays.
Thursdays are good?
Yeah.
Great. Good.
I don't know. We're figuring it all out. Okay, that's
Exactly.
Leah. It's so great to see your face, and hear your wisdom.
Oh, it's so good to see you. Yay. What a pleasure. What a pleasure.
Thanks.
And Jane, oh my gosh. Wow. It really was was it really 10 years ago?
Yeah, 9 years ago now. Yeah.
Oh my
After that. Because I get your emails, so I'm kind of in touch with what you're doing. So
Hi.
Yay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Have a lovely, lovely day. Jane, why don't you stay on for a second?
Oh, okay.
Stop.